Hello everyone, and welcome to the first video, a short video just covering the difference between the AS spec and the A-level spec that you've been learning with me this year. Now both specs carry quite a large area on the market mechanism. 4.18 in the A-level, it's called 3.15 in the AS. Now the idea here, of course, is that you would have learned everything in the AS during year 12, and then hopefully I can then just cover things that are missing or have been added in the A-level content. So let's actually figure out what is different about the two specs. It's probably a good idea to get your AS book in front of you as well, so you can actually make sure that things that appear in the AS specification on the left over here are also within your book. Hopefully then this video, this is obviously the first of a handful of videos, we'll be able to fill in all the blanks. So let's have a look at the first part. So we've got how markets and prices allocate resources. Exactly the same thing over here in the A-level spec. The main difference between the AS and the A-level is that the A-level spec wants you to be aware of the advantages and disadvantages of the price mechanism. So basically asking, is it always appropriate for markets to decide how resources are allocated? And there is a little bit more text in the additional information here as well, and to sort of as if to help you understand what it means by the appropriateness, there is a nice little example here. So, introducing a market for blood changes the nature of the transaction and the incentives involved. Should we introduce a market for blood? Obviously, there's pros and cons to that. So that's the key difference. So I'll be covering that in one of the later videos going through the content. Next up in the A-level and the AS is 3152 or 4182, the meaning of market failure. And in this section, that is pretty much identical. There's nothing new to learn here. The basics of market failure. In the AS, it does say that you need to know what a misallocation of resources is. It doesn't say that in the A-level. Of course, it just assumes you're aware of what that means. And it talks about how some markets do fail. Just gives a little list here of different ways in which the market can fail. Moving on to those markets, it now starts splitting them up. So 4183 is all about public goods, private goods and quasi-public goods. And you can see it's pretty much identical in the AS spec. The only key addition here really is this bit at the bottom, a feature known as the tragedy of the commons. So we'll be covering that when we look at that as part of the A-level specification. It also suggest as we move on here to the next part, 4184, 3154, again pretty similar. The main difference here is in the A-level spec, negative externalities, positive externalities exist, but they want you to know how the absence of property rights leads to market failure. A key difference though over here is in the additional information. In the AS spec, it quite clearly says students are not required to use marginal analysis, which is otherwise known as marginal social cost / marginal social benefit diagrams. Over here, however, it is quite clear that it says students should be able to illustrate a misallocation of resources using diagrams showing marginal private and social cost and benefit curves, otherwise known as marginal analysis. So a key change here is in the diagrams that you need to be able to draw. If I move down to the next section over here in the AS, it's merit and demerit goods, and likewise in the A-level it's the same thing, merit and demerit goods. Now if you actually have a look here, there is nothing that is different between the two areas of content. It's all exactly the same, but again it's very clear. In the AS, it says you are not required to use MSC, MSB diagrams, which could have meant you used a lot of supply and demand or basic product market diagrams. But in the A-level, it does say you should be able to illustrate misallocation of resources using diagrams showing, again, marginal private, social cost and benefit curves. Okay, so we need to be able to use marginal analysis, not just for negative and positive externalities, but also when we look at merit and demerit goods, which of course result in issues on the consumption side. I'll move on. In the AS, what comes next is a short section on market imperfections, basically covering all the other little odds and sods that can lead to market failure. And you'll notice there the same section is repeated in the A-level 4186 here, and it's exactly the same. Okay, so hopefully not too much that can alarm people there, so do dig out your AS books for that. Next up in the AS is it's about the inequitable distribution of income and wealth. Now in the A-level we covered that as an entire content area, and I'll actually just scoot up here on the A-level spec, and you can see 417, which is where we are at the moment, just pre-Easter, is an entire section on that area. So whereas it only got a bullet point before, we've now got an entire section. So I'm going to go straight back down here on the A-level spec to the next area. The next area on the A-level spec is competition policy. Now this is brand new to the A-level spec. 4188 is also brand new to the A-level spec, and you might recall we actually covered these at the end of market structures, because some of the theory, some of the things we learned here in competition policy and public ownership, privatization, regulation and deregulation was actually very relevant to market structures. And if you can't quite remember what that work was, then have a look back through the slides in your books, because I actually presented those using slides, and we found a lot of examples of them in practice. So it was done in a slightly different way. So please again revisit areas 4187 and 4188 in your A-level exercise books. They will not appear in your AS books. So let's see what's next on the AS side. Well, the AS then goes to government intervention. Likewise, so does the A-level. Obviously, we've got slightly different numbers now, but government intervention is literally all the sort of solutions that the government have up their sleeve in order to try and correct market failure. And if you look carefully at both areas, they're pretty similar. Most of you will remember, of course, the diagrams where you had to show the market failing and then show the impact of taxation. So here we have the AS list of interventions over here. The impact of taxation, subsidies, price controls, provision and regulation. Notice over here it's exactly the same, except for a couple of additions. They have the same list down to regulation, but then they've also added the extension of property rights, and interestingly, pollution permits. So we will cover those two things in a bit more depth on a subsequent video. But all the others I'm not looking to cover again. Please remember, alongside your AS exercise books, you also have quite a lot of videos available on the OneNote, and that will be of great interest to you as you try and understand how those things are covered. Moving on to the final part of this section, and therefore the whole A-level spec, is government failure. And actually, the government fails in itself. We're using its interventions to affect a misallocation of resources, and you need to be aware of how that can happen. Okay, and 41810 in the A-level spec over here is pretty much exactly the same as 3159 in the AS spec. Right. In fact, it's the AS spec that has slightly more in that it advises students that they should be aware consumers and producers don't have access to the same information. And of course, you probably are well aware that asymmetric information exists. So that covers the first video, just a little walkthrough of the key differences in this final section. There's not masses of new stuff here in the A-level spec. So it's really, really important that you get out your textbooks from the AS year. And also, please be aware that looking at the two sample papers we have from the exam board, market failure is covered in significant depth. It's not only appeared as an essay pair twice, but it's also appeared as its own section A or B choice. So you really got to know this stuff. I hope that's a helpful lead-in. Next up will be a little bit of the start of what you need to know at A-level.